Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the Tailings Storage Facility Management Workshop hosted by the Resources Regulator. My name is Sally Franco. I'm a Policy Manager in the Regulator, and I'll be your MC for today. So I'd like to now officially welcome you to the Tailings Storage Facility Management Workshop. I would first like to start by acknowledging the Wiradjuri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land, and recognising their continuing connection to the land, waters, and the culture of this area. On behalf of the Resources Regulator, I would like to pay respect to knowledge holders and community members of the land, and acknowledge and pay respect to elders past, present, and future. Thank you for everyone for making the time to come today. As we are all aware, tailings storage facility management is a key issue in the sustainable development of the mining industry for both the coal and metalliferous sectors. The construction, expansion, and day-to-day operation, as well as decommissioning of tailings storage facilities, each have risks which present or affect the sustainable development of the mining industry if not carried out in an appropriate way. As we are all too aware, there are many publicised cases of tailings dam failures across the world which present ongoing liabilities to local communities and also the environment. But on the reverse side, there are leading practice learnings which present opportunities for improved management of tailings storage facility management in New South Wales and throughout Australia. Within the room today, we have mine managers, engineers, water infrastructure managers, metallurgists, processing and tailings managers, geotechnical engineers, world-recognised experts in geomechanics, and regulators to share the learnings and opportunities for improved management of tailings processing and tailings storage. Over the last 12 months, the Resources Regulator has been reviewing tailings management as a compliance priority project. Today is an opportunity to share those learnings. It's also an opportunity to develop cross-awareness of these issues among industry and regulators. I encourage you in your breaks to speak to your fellow peers. It's very rare that we get so many experts in the one room at the same time. And this is an opportunity today to talk about risks and opportunities and together build a culture of leading practice management in this space. Without any further delay, I'd like to introduce Matthew Newton, Director of Compliance Operations for the Resources Regulator, to provide you with an introduction to the Tailings Compliance Priority Project. Matthew is the Director of Compliance Operations within the New South Wales Resources Regulator. The Compliance Operation Branch undertakes risk-based compliance and enforcement activities in relation to obligations under the Mining Act. This includes conducting assessment and compliance activities in relation to the mine rehabilitation activities and security deposits also. Since joining the department in 2013, Matt has been involved in the development of a number of government reform projects that are aimed at improving environmental and rehabilitation performance across the mining sector. Prior to joining the department, Matt has worked as a consultant as well as in site-based mining roles with a particular focus on rehabilitation and mine closure projects. Matthew has approximately 23 years' experience in environmental assessment and management and has been involved in a range of environmental projects relating to mining operations. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks very much, Sally. It's really great to see so many experienced and knowledgeable people in the room. When we first put this together, I guess we've identified a number of knowledge gaps. We thought, well, how's the best way to actually move forward on this? And we thought, well, the best way to do it is to actually get everybody in a room and actually start to share learnings so we can start to develop a pathway forward to address some of these knowledge gaps. Now, today's workshop, we've actually honoured to actually have Professor David Williams here from Queensland University, who's a wealth of experience in tailings management. So I encourage you to prompt him with any questions that you have, fresh off the aircraft from Colombia, where he's looked at some of the recent tailings dam failures. I think this is the first workshop that we're having, and I'd be very interested to gauge your feedback towards the end of the day about the value that you've seen in it. we're putting forward that we'd like to conduct this on an annual basis. And potentially the next one, we'd like to see a lot more industry participation in terms of what's working well at each of their sites, so we can start to learn from each other. And we're actually starting to see that from a rehabilitation aspect in terms of landform design. So going across a lot of the mining industry, it's our role as a regulator really to identify where good practice is actually happening, and then pointing industry where that good practice is happening on the ground. And we're actually starting to see that in the rehab space. So we're actually starting to see the geofluid design starting to be rolled out across a lot of sites. And it's really encouraging to see one engineer from one site actually going and have a talking to another engineer at another site saying, well, how is it actually working on the ground, and what lessons have you learnt, and how can I adopt it to my site? So really encourage that kind of discussion today. A little bit later on, after we've had presentations from David, we'll go into a SWOT analysis session. We found this is probably the most basic way to do it in terms of really facilitate good discussions at the table. So as you head through these presentations today, start making some mental notes in terms of some of the ideas that you have. We'd really like to capture that. What we'll do following that is that we have a panel session this afternoon where we have the range of regulators here on the panel for us to probe. But what I'll do is actually go around the tables and actually start to capture some of the thoughts that come out of the SWOT analysis and actually put that to the panel to actually generate that discussion. So hopefully that will work. So just to give you a little bit of background in terms of the Resources Regulator. So in 2016, it became a standalone regulator. It used to be called Mine Safety, and that was split off from the Department of Industry as a standalone regulator. As of around about April, May last year, the Environmental Sustainability Unit that was previously under the Department of Industry was merged into the Resources Regulator. So now the regulator actually facilitates compliance across both the Mining Act, principally around mine rehabilitation in the mining space, but we also undertake activity approvals and exploration, and also regulating safety and health performance of New South Wales mines and petroleum sites. So the creation of the regulator was designed to ensure a consistent and responsive regulatory approach and provide increased transparency and community confidence, which we believe really goes towards assisting industry to have a social licence to operate. Our vision is to promote a safe and responsible mining, extractive and petroleum industry, and our mission is to enable and support industry to understand and fulfil its obligations. So this is a big part about what today is. It's actually providing that knowledge to industry so that you can become self-compliant. Our compliance approach is increased stakeholder and community confidence in our compliance programs, support the responsible operation and development of the regulated industries, and minimise harm to workers, the environment and the community. So the Tailings Priority Project has really been ongoing since 2018. So this is before the Cadia incident, this is before the latest incident last year, and we identified that from a number of our regulatory inspections where we identified knowledge gaps, and we thought, well, what's the best way to actually close that out? So we've developed this Compliance Priority Project. It was designed to examine the key issues of tailings that have the potential to affect the sustainable development of the mining industry. Now, I guess when the Cadia incident happened, to be actually honest with you, all of the regulators went like this. You're taking the lead in that, aren't you? So we had Dam Safety Committee, we had EPA, we had the Resource Regulator. Wasn't a good look, but to be honest with you, coming out of that process, we've learned a lot. And it's a whole of government now where we're all on the same page. But it's now taking that forward to make sure that we continue that collaboration. So through our regulatory activities, we've identified a number of uncertainties and knowledge gaps in the relations to tailings management. From a rehab perspective, there's been a number of sites that I've been to where I ask the question, okay, so what is your strategy for rehabilitation? And quite often I get told, well, we'll walk away, we'll allow the tailings dam to dry out, maybe 5 years post-closure, we'll come back, we'll remine our waste rock emplacement areas and we'll finish it that way. But from our perspective, that creates a lot of uncertainty. And where's the modelling undertaken to actually verify that your capping strategy is adequate? In a former life, I was a consultant and actually did some due diligence work for a company up in Queensland. Come across a coal tailings dam that was full to the brim, and I said to them at the time, I said, what's your strategy? We're just going to let it to dry out. 5 years later, I came back to that site different personnel on site. Said, what's the strategy with that same tailings dam that was full of the brim? We're just going to let it dry out. So there was no real strategy to actually bring that out to closure. And from a closure perspective, that's probably one of the biggest costs that we have in our security cost estimate, is accounting for tailings dam closure. But there's a lot of uncertainty around that as well. And that was picked up in the New South Wales Audit Office Securities Review. And they are talking about residual risk. What mechanisms does the government have in place to actually address residual risk? So if you cap and rehabilitate a tailings dam, what's the potential for it to fail in the future, and what mechanism do we have to be able to hold money potentially to fix that up down the track when we can't take a title holder to account, the title holder's long gone. So those discussions are starting to happen. But when you talk about security, security is a last resort. We haven't really called upon security for a larger operation for a long time now. But if we're calling on security, then there's something has gone wrong well in advance. We really prefer to take more of a proactive approach so that we're progressively rehabilitating, we're identifying these issues and making sure that we don't get in that spot where we need to call on security. So that's what a large part of today is about, is actually identifying that pathway. The ultimate objective is for mining operators to adopt sustainable tailings management practices and meet legislative obligations. The scope includes the design, construction, operation and decommissioning of tailings dams, specifically in relation to safety, environmental and rehabilitation aspects. I will say in the design phase, we actually have a lot of mining companies now coming to us in their very pre-feasibility phases saying, well, what's the expectations of the regulator, particularly around rehabilitation? And it's really healthy discussion, because that's the time when some of these ideas about tailings management can really factor into the mine design. So whether that's actually changing processes in the mill so that potentially you can actually avoid the need for tailings dams, that would be a really great space to be in. Tails paste, for example, co-disposed landforms. That's the type of things that you really need to be able to consider up front. So that's something we encourage industry to really look at. So the initial phase of the Tailings Compliance Project was involved in an awareness campaign to confirm the role of each of the regulators and to improve communications to facilitate a whole of government approach. So we do have a number of regulators in the room today, and you'll be hearing from them individually about their perspective on tailings management. In late 2018, we had an interagency targeted review program to develop an understanding of the key issues associated with tailings dams on selected sites across the site. So it wasn't an audit, it was really going around kicking the dirt, having some general discussions with site personnel in terms of getting an understanding about how they manage their tailings dams and what issues that we have on site. And we'll have Chris and Jenny talking a little bit later about that. So today's industry workshop represents the next phase of the project. So the objectives of today. This is really what I want you to walk away from. So industry to gain a clear understanding of the expectations of the various regulators in regards to tailings management. We want to facilitate knowledge transfer of leading practice tailings management. For me, leading practice is about simply the best way to do things at a given site. Understand the key risks to be identified and addressed in relation to tailings management through the life cycle of a mining operation, not just a closure. Workshop the constraints and opportunities for adopting leading practice tailings management, and that'll come in the SWOT analysis a little bit later. So that's understanding in terms of what the regulator does well, what the regulator does poorly, how we can improve, but also from an industry perspective as well. An industry to utilise information from the workshop to develop site-specific pathways to achieve sustainable tailing management practices. And as a regulator, that's where we'll be taking it up with each of the sites following this, is to actually identify what issues you have on site and come up with a pathway to address those issues. So what's the resource regulator's expectations? Our expectation is that comprehensive risk assessment has been developed and maintained at each site for tailings dams. And this is actually a big part of our rehab reforms, which I'll talk a little bit later on in the day, is that a big focus now is making sure that industry address their risks. Outcomes of the risk assessment has been factored in the design, construction, operation and decommissioning of tailings dams. For new and modified projects, alternative tailings management practices are evaluated and implemented where practical. Controls have been implemented and maintained to address risks, so risk control effectiveness. Monitoring systems are in place to determine risk control effectiveness. There's emergency preparedness in place, and that's been tested. And closure risks are defined very much up front, so we're not dealing with that towards the end of closure. So that's mainly from me. Is there any particular questions you have before we proceed?
Just on the expectations, is that for operating and non-operating dams? So a dam that hasn't been rehabilitated yet?
Yes, absolutely. So for us to be able to close out on a tailings dam, we need to make sure that all the risks have been addressed before we sign it off. Okay, thanks guys.